like a podcast.
It's a
like
broadcast.
A
It's a Shabroadcast. Here,
Hi,
wait, let me.
video
Hi.
Oh,
Hi.
no,
Hi, Aunt Adira.
cast.
Oh, we're live. All right, ready? Here we go. Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Hasharet, Malachei Elyon, Melech, Malachei HaMelachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Boachem Leshalom, Malachei HaShalom, Malachei Elyon, Melech, Malachei HaMelachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
I can't see the words.
Use two fingers.
Yeah.
All right, I'll do it. Just pause for a minute, sweetheart. Barchuni leshalom, Malachei HaShalom, Malachei Elyon, Melech, Malachei HaMelachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You sing Tzedchem Shalom, Tzedchem Leshalom, Malachei HaShalom, Malachei Elyon, Melech, Malachei HaMelachim. Two fingers, yeah. HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Again, HaKadosh. HaKadosh Baruch Hu. One last time. HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
Okay.
Well, welcome, y'all. Good Shabbos. Welcome to the Von Trapp family Heidemann. This is actually the dream that I've had for the past 7.5 years. It's happening right now. You're watching it in real time.
Has it been 7 years since the
No,
pandemic?
no. Okay, fair enough. We started doing these live streams in,
2020?
February?
March or April, whenever,
What-
right away, April.
Yeah, whatever, 2020. And we were in this same living room, but this kid was 4 and she was 2. No, 3 and 1.
Even
I
younger.
wasn't alive.
No, you were definitely alive
Hair
because
was
you were a
crawling on
baby.
the
You
floor.
weren't even walking yet. You were crawling. And we would have to, and we were on this computer screen doing live streams. So, doing Shabbat, bringing in Shabbat, like trying to make time mean something in the midst of, just like interminable days, weeks, months that were all the same because we were inside the whole time. And my dream was that everybody would like get on this thing together and sing together and make music. And tonight my dream is coming true, and it's just as wonderful as I always imagined. Do you have a question or an observation or a need?
Mama.
Okay, we're not going to talk about that right now. All right. So I did promise these little people who do go to Jewish school that I would ask them about this week's Torah portion. Okay. Well, Adira, this is your time to shine. Come on over. Because I'm going to talk about this later, but I am curious to know what Torah portion is it?
Schmo.
And what does that mean? Do you know?
No.
Okay. Well, what's it about?
It's the Pesach story.
is the Pesach story,
know
which
what it means.
Judah knows what it means. What does it mean?
Names.
Names, which that's interesting. Do you know why it means names? What are the names? Whose names? I'll tell you. It's all of it, it's in the first few verses of the Parsha. It's all of the names of all of the tribes of Israel who went down to Egypt, which we spent all of the last book of Genesis reading, and they give you all these names in order to say, here's who's here. They multiplied and grew great, and then basically Pharaoh forgot all about the story of Joseph and Jacob and his 12 tribes and his sons and everything that they did for the land of Egypt, and the Israelites were enslaved. I'm going to talk about all of that later, but when you said it's the Passover story, that's right. We read it twice, and that's sometimes confusing for people because we read the story now, but then we tell the story again at Passover.
She said she knows one more thing.
You know one more thing? What's that?
That the mean pharaoh didn't know the nice pharaoh Joseph when he came to Egypt.
The mean Pharaoh didn't know anything about the nice Pharaoh or Joseph
And
when
he didn't know them.
he didn't know them. He did not know them.
They were both dead.
They were both dead, but the text does say exactly what she just said. Pharaoh did not know Joseph, which, there's like a whole question about that. Did he know the history, but he just didn't want to know? Did he forget? In any case, thank you for sharing that with me.
Now can I go get the
Let's bless these kids and then get them out of here. Let's play on a
We'll
bakah.
sing,
Yeah.
One song and then,
Yeah.
and then
All right. And then you can have some dessert, sweetheart. It's possible that the dream is coming true with bribery. The plot thickens.
Wonderful dream.
All right. I'm going to put on the screen the blessing that, just the words, so that if you want to bless along, you can join us. Hang on 1 second here. We always, when we light the candles, which maybe you can't see because I'm hiding them, but there are candles lit behind us. And when we light them, we always ask, where are people, who are people that you might want to send some love and light to? And so, infallibly, these kids will say people who are in the room. We're thinking, what Henry and I are thinking about is grandparents and people who are sick, people who are in need. But Judah and Adira will always say, and mommy and daddy. So for whoever is in the room that you are in, and for whoever you'd like to have be in the room that you're in, living or dead, honestly, I want to invite you to take a moment to just think about sending them some love and light. And so as we bless these little people, you can take and channel this blessing to all of the places that you want to send love and light. So, Yisimech Elohim, Kasara, Rivka, Rachel v'Leah, Yisimcha Elohim, K'Ephraim v'Chimenashe, and then both of you, Yivarechecha Adonai v'Yishmerecha, Yair Adonai panav elecha v'yichuneka. Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. May God bless you and guard you and keep you safe and healthy. May God shine a path for you, and may you shine your light bright in the world. May you be a peacemaker, and may peace follow you wherever you go.
Amen.
Amen. Amen. Amen to that.
Ow.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
For everybody who's tuning in right now, I want you to know, I had multiple paragraphs of an intro that I'm just skipping right now because we've got children who are here, and I'll do more talking later. You never have to worry about me not talking. So rather than me talking more now, I think we'll make a little more music, and so if you want to pick up the silver harmonica, you can.
What's but it's hurting my mouth.
Okay, then Judah can play.
Yeah, silver one, sweetheart.
But the
No, not that one. Not that one.
And I just,
The right
before
one.
we begin playing, while we're arranging ourselves here, shh, thank you. This is a prayer, as you can see, asking that God's greatness be channeled into the loosening of the bonds that hold people in captivity, that keep people in fear and insecurity, and and heartbreak and loneliness. And so as part of that sending love and light, I know so many of us right now are thinking about friends and family in LA still. So many of us are thinking about this precarious and fragile ceasefire. May it be, and may people who haven't seen their families in 16 months or seen their homes return to them. May those homes be rebuilt. May families heal, and may the whole region heal. Any other prayers you want to send up, where you want to direct God's love tonight? Ana bekoach gedulat Yemincha tatir tzerura Kabel rinat amecha Sagreinu tareinu nora. One more time, Ana bekoach. Ana bekoach gedulat Yemincha tatir tzerura Kabel rinat amecha Sagreinu tareinu nora. Na 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 gibor na 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 gibor na 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 gibor na 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 gibor dorshe yechurcha dorshe yechurcha kevavat shomereim. Sweetheart, come here, get a kiss. Oh, sweetheart. You want a kiss? Just give her a kiss. Yeah. She bumped her kepi on the table. Let's sing na gibor. Na 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 gibor na 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 gibor na 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 gibor na 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 gibor dorshe yechurcha dorshe yechurcha kevavat shomereim. One more time. Na 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 gibor na 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 gibor na 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 gibor na 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 gibor dorshe yechurcha dorshe yechurcha kevavat shomereim. Yasher koach. You want to make kiddush together?
Yes.
Awesome.
After, can I get my dessert?
Yes, dude. All right. Let's see. Here we go.
We don't have nothing in there.
All right. Well, maybe we can get a little from there. All right. Feel free to get a fancy cup or a not fancy cup. My great-grandma made this for me when I was 13. I see Sarah says that this was her bat mitzvah parsha. Mine was in a few weeks on this date many moons ago.
What is moons ago?
Many moons ago, like a long time. All right, shall we? Vayhi erev vayhi boker yom hashishi vayachulu hashamayim v'haaretz v'chotzevam v'chal Elohim b'yom hashvi melachto asher asa vayishmot b'yom hashvi mikol melachto asher asa vayivarech Elohim et yom hashvi v'yikadesh oto כי בו שבת מכל מלאכתו, אשר ברא אלוהים לעשות. סברי. לחיים. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, בורא פרי הגפן. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, אשר קידשנו במצוותיו ורצבנו, בשבת קודשו באהבה ורצון ינחילנו, זיכרון למעשה בראשית. כי הוא יום תחילה מקראי קודש, זכר ליציאת מצרים. כי באנו בחרת ואותנו קידשת עם כל העמים, בשבת קודשך באהבה ורצון הנחלתנו.
ברוך אתה
מקדש השבת. אמן. קלינק. Clink.
Yummy.
Yummy indeed. Well, friend, you are free to get dessert if you want. And maybe get something for Adira too. Because poor girl bumped her head. I knew it was too good to last.
I thought it was her toe or something.
No. All right. All right, well.
Mom,
Here, yes, Judah.
Tonight, can I go to bed not so early?
You got to talk to Daddy about it.
But Mom,
Love you. Don't argue with me right now. I'm in a Shabbat. Bye. Love you. All right. Friends. Let's talk about the Torah portion, shall we? Let me reorganize myself here. Okay. For those of you who have not seen it yet, I apologize in advance for spoiling a major plot point in the movie Wicked. Dude, bye. Go back, talk to Daddy. I'm going to start again. All right, for those of you who have not seen it, I apologize in advance for spoiling a major plot point in the movie Wicked. If you want, turn off your sound for the next 30 seconds and then turn it back on again, and the drosh will still make sense. Even if you've only watched the original Wizard of Oz, you know that the wizard is someone who is hiding a truth about himself and feels pretty insecure about his station. And so when, in Wicked, Elphaba and Galinda, two young, optimistic students, go to meet the wizard, he shares one of his strategies with them, a strategy to keep him in power, lacking any actual power, certainly lacking the fearsome magical power that he pretends to have. And he says to them, the best way to bring folks together is to give them a really good enemy. And in Wicked, the animals are the enemy. And if you've seen Wicked, you know the animals actually played quite an important role in society. They are professors and doctors and bartenders and nannies and nurses and, hold every role and station in Oz. And yet they are made out to be this nefarious force, this other, worthy of being stripped of their rights and protections. And in the book of Exodus, which we begin reading this week, the book of Shemot, as we talked about earlier, the Israelites are the enemy. And the Israelites in this story, too, you will remember, the last month of Torah readings were valued members of Egyptian society, right? We talked all about it as we sang the songs from Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. Joseph, in particular, rose to the level of being Pharaoh's chief advisor and minister of the treasury and minister of agriculture and, basically like the chief of staff and vice president, second only to Pharaoh. And because of his great success and contributions to Egyptian society, he's able to bring his whole Israelite family, all, 12 brothers, and their entire big families, and they're given the best of the land, and they're integrated so deeply and valued in Egyptian society. And that's how the book of Genesis ends. And then, of course, as we just said a moment ago, the book of Shemot begins with a recitation of all these names of all the people who had come down and settled in the land of Egypt, made their homes there. So you have to wonder, how does it happen that good people can turn on their neighbors, friends, teachers, doctors, nannies, nurses, baristas, accountants, lawyers, people they might date and marry, certainly people they trust deeply as friends and colleagues? How can they instead come to villainize and dehumanize and even personally harm physically those people or stand by while others do the same? To quote my brother-in-law Aryeh, Rabbi Aryeh Bernstein, how can a multicultural superpower country turn into a tyranny? And as we begin Parshat Shemot, that is the driving question of the Torah. Now, there are many books that explore this question meaningfully and have throughout history, and just in modern history, George Orwell's 1984, Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451, Alexei Navalny, the late Alexei Navalny just put out a book, Patriot, published posthumously, Tim Snyder's book on tyranny. They're really important to be reconnecting with in this moment. And yet tonight, we turn to Torah because that's what we do as Jews week after week. And we believe that the truth that is in Torah is not necessarily because the story that we're reading happened. Rather, the story that we're about to read happens. Truth isn't necessarily because it's history. It's because it's what happens over and over again. And the story we begin reading this week is familiar across time, and it bears repeating year after year, multiple times a year, not just now as we read it in the flow of the Torah, but also again at Passover. And also, by the way, every time we sing Mi Chamocha and invoke the Exodus from Egypt, which is twice a day in our davening, because our tradition wants us to take this to heart. And so while I recommend going and reading and familiarizing yourself with some of those classics, tonight I just want to look at the Torah and see what jumps out at us this year from this timeless story. By the way, let me just say, this parsha is so rich, so I recommend taking some time over this Shabbat to do like a Passover Haggadah style read through with somebody you love, with a friend, and just see what jumps out at you. I am going to share my screen now because I want to read this next section with you. I want you to see it. Here we go. So this is what I want to look at. We're going to start with verse 6. Exodus, chapter 1, verse 6. Joseph died, and all his brothers, and all that generation. Uvnei Yisrael paru v'yitritzu v'yirbu v'yamtzu b'ma'od ma'od v'timalei ha'aretz otam. But the Israelites were fertile and prolific. They multiplied and increased very greatly so that the land was filled with them. Vayakom melech chadash al Mitzrayim asher lo yada et Yosef. And a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, look, the Israelite people is too big for us. Am b'nei Yisrael rav v'atzum mimenu. Let us deal shrewdly with them so that they may not increase. Otherwise, in the event of war, they may join our enemies in fighting us and rise from the ground. So I'm going to just stop there for now. just notice in the space of 5 brief verses, from 6 to 10, a generation dies out, the Israelites continue, a new Pharaoh arises who appears to not know history, and the rest of the story begins. So, just read. From verses 6 to 10, we see a generational shift. Joseph dies, his brother dies, everyone from his generation, everyone who remembers the famine across the region, how everyone was starving and thirsty. But Joseph managed to devise a plan for a benevolent Pharaoh at that time to assume ownership over Egypt's land and have its produce rationed out to the people so that they not only survived, but actually Egypt was able to provide food for anyone in the region who came to Egypt needing food, which is what brought Joseph's brothers down there. The previous Pharaoh appears to have had a mindset of abundance. There is enough in this land for it to go around as long as it's being well managed and stewarded responsibly. And Joseph actually did that, and that Pharaoh actually did that, and it worked well for a while. But as we saw in verse 8, a new Pharaoh arose, who knew not Joseph. The policy that had saved many lives and consolidated Pharaoh's power and the wealth of the country under Pharaoh now is in a whole new kind of position underneath a new Pharaoh with much power to wield and a very short-term memory. And this Pharaoh doesn't have a memory for the relatively recent history of his own country, certainly not how they managed to overcome this famine, no memory for the great leaders of who the past were, or how his country attained the stability and wealth that it had achieved against the backdrop of this famine. And by the way, the role the Jewish people had had in building that stability and wealth. And more importantly, this Pharaoh does not have a mindset of abundance, wherein his people are capable of strength, even as other people can be strong as well. This Pharaoh sees only scarcity and the prospect of his dominance being threatened and challenged and toppled. Despite his obvious power and dominance over Egypt, this guy is fragile and insecure. Perhaps he remembers the vulnerability of famine and sort of carries that victim mentality with him. But he forgets how his own people actually got out of that situation. Or maybe he is simply incapable of seeing of how strong and well-resourced his kingdom is. And in his insecurity, he asks himself, what's the best way to bring folks together around your power? Like the wizard, give them a good enemy. And so he invents both a fantastical catastrophe, a war, which hasn't happened, it's just imaginary. But if there were to be a war, and they were to be on one side, surely these Israelites would join the other side. And so we must not allow them to proliferate, to increase, lest they join our enemies. I just want you to see this in verse 10 in the Hebrew. Hang on. Havanit chachmalo pen yir right here, lest they increase. And that's important because it justifies what comes next. They impose harsh rule on the Israelites. And then if you look 2 verses later to verse 12, despite their oppression, ken yirbeh, nonetheless the Israelites increased. And so the Talmud looks at this funny turn of phrase, this kind of, this interesting rhyme, pen yirbeh, lest they increase. 2 verses later, ken yirbeh, in fact they did increase. And says, this is what happens. This is what God does when Pharaoh acts from fear and insecurity. God actually helps him fulfill his own twisted prophecy. How often does that happen, by the way? Right? Like responding to one isolated event, say 9/11, something terrible and destabilizing, yet isolated. leaders in this country took America head on into a war in Iraq and Afghanistan under the premise of preventing even more death and destruction and instability and insecurity, right? Pen, lest there be more death and destruction and instability and insecurity. And the eventual result of exactly that was orders of magnitude more death and destruction and instability and insecurity. One might say the same thing about Israel's war in Gaza, however necessary it might have felt on the heels of October 7th, on October 8th, not only to stop Hamas's massacre of Israelis, but to fight back. As the days turned into months and now over a year, the result has been unimaginable death and destruction and instability, certainly for Gazans. Also, over 800 Israeli soldiers have died, not to mention, the threats from the various other nations in solidarity with Gazans. And all of this for the promise of security. Is anyone's life better or more safe today because of this war? Tim Snyder, in his book on tyranny, describes how leaders will use catastrophe, or even just the prospect of catastrophe, to justify suspending laws, exempting them from due process, finding enemies to prosecute without evidence in the name of security. And questioning this all, of course, becomes traitorous. He writes, "Remember that authoritarians exploit such events in order to consolidate power. The sudden disaster that requires the end of checks and balances, the dissolution of opposition parties, the suspension of freedom of expression, the right to a fair trial, and so on, is the oldest trick in the Hitlerian book. Do not fall for it." That's Tim Snyder. And Pharaoh does not go straight from inventing a catastrophe to enslaving Israelites. First, there is a consistent, repeated propaganda. The use of insults, words that paint the Israelites as vermin, multiplying like bugs if you look at the language, as shrewd and cunning warmongers who will join with their enemies, people who will only understand the language of force. Does that sound familiar? While the Torah describes this in a mere verse, you have to imagine that this happens, this process of a propaganda campaign happens over months and months. Otherwise, how could the Egyptians, who had previously been so generous, taken in Joseph, Jacob, his 12 sons, their big families, and over generations, built real relationships with the Israelites, married them, built families with them, how could they possibly abide the decrees that Pharaoh ultimately begins making, enslaving their neighbors, killing their neighbors' children in the name of security? But sure enough, that is what they eventually do. Looking at this moral descent of the society, Rabbi Aryeh Bernstein writes, "Words matter. Defamation matters. The brutal slavery and killing of babies could not have happened without a prior defamation campaign. Hitler of 1944 was impossible without Hitler of 1930. An armed invasion of Congress is continuous with birtherism. When we tell the story of slavery in Egypt, the story must start with a new king's media campaign to defame the descendants of Israel, turning the opinion of the Israelite masses against them, creating a new mythic Egyptian identity built off its opposition to the newly fabricated nation of Israelites." Now, what you have to know here is in verse 9, it is the first time the words in Torah, Am, Bnei Israel, the Am, the people, appear. Previously, they are only referred to as Bnei Israel, the children or descendants of Jacob, or Israel. They are a plurality. Bnei, Banim, children, multiple. Am is singular. It is an it, a thing, with essential qualities in this thingness that are dangerous to us, different from us, we, of course, who are people. This is the kind of language that made it possible for white Americans to enslave black Americans. And once that was officially illegal, to create legalized tiers of inequality, to walk past or even watch like it was entertainment the lynching of Black Americans, to first assassinate Dr. Martin Luther King's character for suggesting that America could do better than the racial caste system that made a mockery of our founding ideals, but that is what ultimately paved the way for his actual assassination. Words matter. Labeling a group as deviant, vermin-like, prone to violence, lazy, diseased, weak, this makes them targets of actual violence because people believe it and believe they are less than human and therefore worthy of being targeted by violence. Now, much in the same way as the queer community has taken what was a slur and reclaimed it as a badge of pride, the Jewish people, Am Yisrael, obviously took what was an insult when Pharaoh said it and have reclaimed it as our own. So now when somebody refers to the Jewish people, Am Yisrael, we know, and they should know, that we are a global family that includes ethnicities, nationalities, races, languages, culinary styles, musical traditions across the planet. And there's actually very little that we can say that is an essential, inherent quality other than a relationship, either biological or spiritual, to this story, right? This family, B'nai Israel, and a relationship with Torah. But when you start trafficking in descriptions, personality traits, aptitudes based on a person's biological membership in a group, you start skating on thin ice. And we Jews know this game all too well. And if this is true of our people, we know this is true of everyone who has been turned into an other for the purpose of creating unity and strength by identifying a common enemy for a different group. And it's dangerous when we see it and hear it, and we need to name it and not let it go unchecked. We can't be like the Egyptians who listened to their leader speak falsehoods and probably said things like, he's just bombastic. He does it for the attention. He doesn't mean it. Or it's just words. He's not going to do anything. Until those words became so ubiquitous and so familiar and so often repeated that they felt like truth. Or at least it became hard to argue with because at this point too many people agreed, either through ignorance or because they actually came to believe the lie that it's possible to secure one's own safety through another's denigration. And to question it, of course, would be treason. And this is why it was so powerful in 2016 when the Trump administration started speaking in dehumanizing ways about Muslims and people who come from Muslim countries. Jewish communities like ours helped resettle families who were fleeing oppressive regimes in Syria and Afghanistan and Iraq, who were suffering just as much as anyone else under the oppression of those regimes. Or at Rabbi Stephen's synagogue in New York, where he worked at the time, they stood outside of a mosque holding signs saying, "We welcome you, we love you in this country. We don't believe the lies we're being fed. We believe you are human." And his rabbi, Sharon Kleinbaum, would often say, how different would Germany have been if Christian communities had done the same thing for Jews? So if the social media platforms in this country, the place where most young people get their news, are going to abdicate their role in calling out falsehoods and dehumanizing lies, just at the moment when we are about to inaugurate a president whose popularity is based in part on creating a common enemy for white Americans or wealthy Americans out of minority groups, whether undocumented immigrants or trans people or Arabs or Jews or disabled people. We are in a very precarious place. We need to be even more vigilant about naming falsehoods when we see them, when we hear them, when someone repeats them, naming hate speech when we see it. Oftentimes people won't even know that is what it is. And so we need to help when we see it by naming falsehoods that are painting dehumanizing pictures, whether of our neighbors or of us. On the heels of the Holocaust and of World War II, the world learned, the world saw, and was horrified by how abjectly dangerous this kind of dehumanizing rhetoric and thinking is, and how inevitably it leads even the most civilized, sophisticated society, toward violence. And so the world came together to create the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is premised, like our Torah, on the inherent dignity and equality of every human being, of the right of every person, no matter who they are, no matter where they're born, to be free, to be safe. And it states the inviolable and inherent right of every person to be safe and free wherever they live. And I believe that in December of 1948, when the UN's Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted, world leaders believed that a universal vision of the rights and dignity of every person, regardless of race or sex or religion or national origin, adopted by every country sincerely, that with this kind of a vision, we could create a world where people are actually free and live full, fulfilling lives on the soil they call home. I think they believed that humanity could do it. If we could just keep our eye on that prize and not succumb to tribalism and fear and scarcity. That's sort of the question, isn't it? Still. So as we enter a weekend of honoring the work of Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., as we enter the next 4 years in this country, as we enter, God willing, the next chapter between Israelis and Palestinians, may we remember that the Torah begins with one person in the Garden of Eden, as a testament, our sages say, to the notion that no one has the right to say about anyone else, my father was greater than your father, because we all stem from one original person. Let us remember that our common enemy is never another people. It's the notion that we should forget our founding truths in the name of self-preservation, lest we lose ourselves. Cain, yes, let us find ourselves, even more firmly committed to the dignity of all people as the most powerful expression of our Jewish inheritance. Ken Yehi Ratzon. Let this be so, and let us lead the way for everyone who needs to see the light. Play Gesher. Kol ha'olam kulo Gesher tzar me'od. Because this is a hard and a narrow bridge. Kol ha'olam kulo Gesher tzar me'od. Kol ha'olam hu Gesher Tsar, kol ha'olam kulo, gesher tsar me'od, kol ha'olam hu gesher, v'ha'ikar, lo lefached klal, lo lefached, v'ha'ikar, לא לפחד כלל, לא לפחד. כל העולם כולו גשר צר מאוד, כל העולם גשר צר, כל העולם כולו גשר צר מאוד, כל העולם גשר העיקר, לא לפחד כלל, לא לפחד, העיקר, לא לפחד כלל, לא לפחד. As I walk along this very narrow bridge, I will not be afraid, knowing you are with me. As I walk along this very narrow bridge, I will not fear, knowing you are here. והעיקר, העיקר, לא לפחד כלל, לא לפחד. והעיקר, והעיקר, לא לפחד כלל, לא לפחד. והעיקר, והעיקר, לא לפחד כלל, לא לפחד. Woo. We'll close with Kaddish Yatom tonight, Mourner's Kaddish, which, we're trying to make these live streams feel a little bit, a little bit more like a Shabbat table, and less like a service, because this isn't a whole service. But I recognize that for many folks, the healing prayer, which we sort of did at the beginning along with Ana B'Koach, and Mourner's Kaddish, remembering people who have passed on, that feels still pretty important. So we will do that now. If there's somebody you're thinking of tonight who you want to say Kaddish for, who you want to remember out loud, please go ahead and share their name. Yehi zichronam livracha. May all their memories be blessings. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shmei rabba. V'amad divrach harutei v'amlich malchutei. B'chayachon of yomechon. V'chayei dechol beit Yisrael. B'agalau v'zman kariv v'imru. Amen. Yehi shmei rabba mevorach le'olam olamei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yit'aleh v'yithalal shmei dekudsha. Brichu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbachata v'nechamata, damiran be'alma v'imru, amen. Yehi shlam haraba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru, amen. Use shalom bimromav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol yoshvei tevel, v'imru, amen. Amen. All right, and actually, by way of closing, we're going to close with Adon Olam, and the reason for that is because this week, we welcomed a new little baby into the covenant of the Jewish people. Welcome Sam Levin Kushner, Samuel Theodore. And this song was meaningful to the family. And so I want to close out with this tonight, in the off chance that they're listening, and in the off chance Samuel hears it, and this, becomes part of his Jewish subconscious. Oh, thank you, Laura. Yeah, remembering Celia, which we basically do every week in some form or fashion. But thank you for saying her name. Oh, all right. All right, we're going to close out with this one. Adon Olam, Asher Malach, V'terem kol Yitzir Nivra, Le'ed Nasa B'chefto kol, Azai Melech Shemo Nikra, Ve'acharei Kichlot HaKol, Levado Yimloch Nora, V'hu Haya, V'hu Hove, V'hu Yiyeh B'tifara, V'hu אחד ואין שני, להמשיל לו להכבירה, בלי ראשית, בלי תכלית, ולא העוז והמזרע, והוא אלי וחי גואלי, וצור חבלי בעת צרה, והוא ניסי ומנוס לי, מנת כוסי ביום הקרא בידו אפקיד רוחי והייתי שן ועירה ואם רוחי גוויתי אדוני לי ולא יירא. Shabbat shalom. Mwah. If you're here in Chicago, come to CJDS and see you in the morning.